Top 10. So it's time for another segment of Top 10. I'm going to give you my pick, the top 10 greatest hockey teams of all time.
All time!
This is in my opinion, mind you. So, again, if you don't agree, or you agree, or you just want to put in your 2 cents, where can they do that, Budman?
Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and now our website at www.nothingsacredpodcast.simplesite.com. It's a simple site. It's easy to get to.
There you go. So, let's start with number 10. The 1973-1974 Philadelphia Flyers. The first of the 1967 expansion teams to win a Stanley Cup. They combined smarts and grit and toughness, and they ripped through the league, and they upset the big bad Bruins in 6 games of the final that year. Their record was 50 wins, 16 losses, 12 ties for 112 points. A couple notable Hall of Famers on that team. Ed Snyder, who was the owner, Fred Shero, the coach, Bobby Clark, the captain, Bill Barber, and of course the great Bernie Parent, who made the saves when it counted most, and they won the Stanley Cup that year. Number
1.
The 1971-1972 Boston Bruins. The Big Bad Bruins. They were a force back then, and they had players like the great Bobby Orr, Phil Esposito. Man, much like the Flyers, they had strength, they had size, and they had skill. Really good team. Number 8. The 1962-1963 Toronto Maple Leafs. They were third in the league in goals against and second in goals for, but they still finished atop the regular season standings and ran through the Stanley Cup final in 5 games. They had a record of 35 wins, 23 losses, 12 ties. Notable players included the great Frank Mahovlich, George Armstrong, Red Kelly, Tim Horton, and Johnny Bower. Number 7, the 1984-1985 Philadelphia Flyers. This team has a special place in the cockles of my heart. They had a great team. They went all the way to the finals that year. The great Pelle Lindbergh was just emerging as a force. The first Swedish goaltender, by the way, to win a Vezina Trophy for goaltender of the year. Some would consider they're one of the greatest Flyer teams of all time. They had a great coach, Mike Keenan, and basically the only other team that was more dominant than them at the time was the Edmonton Oilers, which, don't worry, they're on the list a couple times here coming up. Again, some players of note on that team was Tim Kerr, Brian Propp, Dave Poulin, Mark Howe, and as I said, Pelle Lindbergh. They lost in the Stanley Cup final to Edmonton that year. Number 6, the 1995-96 Detroit Red Wings. They did fail to win a championship that year, but they had one of the greatest teams in NHL history. Even though Colorado put them out in the conference final, the record that they had was absolutely ridiculous. They were 62 wins, 13 losses, 7 ties.
Damn!
For 131 points. Notable and future Hall of Famers included Steve Yzerman, Igor Larionov, Dino Ciccarelli, Paul Coffey, Nick Lidstrom, Scotty Bowman, the coach, Sergei Fedorov. The list goes on and on. They were a force to be reckoned with. Number 5. The 1987-88 Edmonton Oilers. This is the first and not the last Edmonton Oilers team on this list. If you watched hockey, grew up with hockey in the 80s like I did, you are hard-pressed to tell me of any greater dynasty in hockey ever, or really any other better team in hockey ever. We will touch on this team again. So I will leave it at this. The 87-88 Oilers were in the middle of their reign, their dynasty, if you will. And when you have guys like Yeri Curry, Mark Messier, Grant Fuhr in net, and obviously Wayne Gretzky, and the list goes on and on and on. Yeah, you know that's a team that's going to make this list more than once. Number 4, the 1991-92 Pittsburgh Penguins. These guys, they were shit for a long time. But then they got Mario Lemieux, and things slowly started to turn around. And by 91-92, Pittsburgh, they were ready, and they took the Stanley Cup. They had notable players like Mario Lemieux, Rick Tocchet, guys like that. Number 3, the 1982-83 New York Islanders. The New York Islanders, this season, this was their 4th championship in a row. They still hold a record, this team, for 19 straight consecutive playoff wins. 4 Stanley Cups in a row, and they got to the finals and went for a 5th one, which would have tied a record with the Montreal Canadiens, but it didn't happen. But that's another story. But the 82-83 New York Islanders had probably the most pure goal scorer in history, Mike Bossy. They had Trottier. They had Gillies. Of course, they had battling Billy Smith in net. And that year, by the way, that I'm referring to, 1982-83, they went to the finals and they kicked Edmonton's ass in the finals. But Wayne Gretzky later said that was a turning point for the team, because when they lost the Stanley Cup to the New York Islanders, they obviously didn't want to experience that feeling again. Number 2, the 1976-77 Montreal Canadiens. You knew there had to be a Montreal Canadian team in here somewhere. I could have picked from a lot of different Montreal teams, but this is the team that I am most familiar with, especially as a child. The 76-77 Montreal Canadiens. Again, this is a team that was in the middle of yet another dynasty, one of many in this team's history, but it's the record in the regular season of this team that impresses you the most. 60 wins, 8 losses, 12 ties. That was a record for the longest time, until obviously the Detroit Red Wings came along. And if you want reference to what I'm talking about, look back at number 6 for the answer to that. This team included such powerhouses as Guy Lafleur, the Flower, Steve Shutt, Larry Robinson, Savard, Gainey.
Did you just say
Carbonneau? Yeah.
The Flower.
Yeah, that's what they called him. Guy
That
the Flower Lafleur.
That guy must have been hard as fuck.
That guy was one of the craziest goal scorers in league history. And a Hall of Famer, I might add, with good reason.
Just had to throw that in there.
And of course, they had the octopus in the net, Ken Dryden, who, if you listen to previous podcasts, I've stated was basically, he was the guy that I was like, wow, I want to play hockey. I want to be just like him. Number 1, the 1984-1985 Edmonton Oilers. After losing the Stanley Cup the previous year to the New York Islanders, the Oilers came out in 1984-85 to prove a point. And did they ever? This team is significant for the fact that it started the reign that Edmonton had, the dynasty that they had in the 80s. Obviously, Gretzky was at, his greatest power. Again, I mentioned them before, Curry, Messier. They had Andy Mogan, Grant Fuhr in net. They just had Kevin Lowe was coming into his own. Wow, you could go on and on and on and on and on. Again, they're the Edmonton Oilers. And they're the Edmonton Oilers of the 80s, in particular 1984-85. Before I close this, I just want to make a few honorable mentions. The 1954-55 Detroit Red Wings, the 1995-96 Colorado Avalanche, the 1988-89 Calgary Flames, the 1998-99 Dallas Stars, and the 2009-10 Chicago Blackhawks. Next top 10 will be the top 10 NHL goaltenders of all time. That's it. That's all.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard, hit that like button. And subscribe to join the cult of motherfuckers.